Badge number 4721. I'll remember it. Her voice was calm, too calm. As three police officers towered over her on the busy downtown sidewalk, their hands hovering near their holsters, the morning crowd slowing to witness the confrontation. The lead officer smirked. "Lady, you can memorize whatever you want. Doesn't change that you fit the description." Smartphones emerged from pockets and purses like witnesses summoned to testify, recording as the professionally dressed black woman stood her ground, briefcase clutched in one hand, the other raised slightly in a gesture both defensive and dignified. The officers had stopped her mere moments ago, demanding identification, explanation, compliance, though she had simply been walking to work. What they couldn't see was the federal courthouse ID tucked inside her wallet. What they couldn't know was that in precisely 8 hours, one of these same officers would stand before her bench, awaiting her ruling on his department's pattern of constitutional violations. Have you ever fantasized about that perfect moment when someone who underestimated you realizes exactly who you are? The initial confrontation. Judge Elise Montgomery had walked the same route to the federal courthouse for 7 years, 1,823 mornings of the same turns, same crosswalks, same nods to familiar faces. Today marked her first day presiding over United States v. Metropolitan Police Department, a landmark class action case alleging systematic racial profiling and Fourth Amendment violations throughout the city. The irony wasn't lost on her when Officer Daniels stepped directly into her path at exactly 8:32 a.m., blocking her from continuing toward the courthouse, visible just 2 blocks away. "Ma'am, we've had reports of a suspicious woman matching your description in this area," he said, voice dripping with unearned authority. His nameplate gleamed in the morning sun. "Officer J. Daniels." "On what grounds?" Elise asked, maintaining perfect composure despite the sudden acceleration of her heartbeat. She had precisely 28 minutes before pre-trial motions were scheduled to begin. Officer Reyes stepped closer, hand resting casually on his belt. "We don't need grounds." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "Cooperate, or things get complicated." The smell of his coffee breath mingled with the scent of the city. Car exhaust, someone's perfume, the bakery on the corner. Ordinary smells on what should have been an ordinary morning. "I'm simply walking to work, officers," Elise responded, her voice measured, her law degree almost audibly humming beneath each syllable. "Unless you're detaining me based on reasonable suspicion of a specific crime, I'll be on my way." Officer Daniels' radio crackled. His partner muttered something about another entitled one, the coded language of presumed guilt. A young woman across the street slowed her pace, then stopped entirely, watching the interaction with narrowed eyes. She pulled out her phone, angling it toward the confrontation. The first witness. The first documentation. The first thread in what would become a tapestry of evidence. Elise's monogrammed leather briefcase, a gift from her clerks when she received her federal appointment, hung from her right hand. The small scales of justice beneath her initials EKM caught the sunlight as she shifted her weight. A silent declaration of identity that went completely unnoticed by the officers. "I need you to step over here," Officer Daniels said, gesturing toward the building wall with a flick of his wrist. The casual entitlement of a man accustomed to instant compliance. "No, I don't believe I will," Elise replied, her refusal quiet but firm as granite. Again, "Am I being detained?" The question, precise, legal, pointed, visibly irritated Officer Daniels. His jaw tightened. A vein in his temple pulsed once. 25 minutes to court. "Stand against the wall, ma'am," Officer Daniels ordered, his tone shifting from annoyed to aggressive, the veins in his neck becoming more pronounced. Something about her calm was clearly unsettling him. People like her were supposed to be afraid. People like her were supposed to comply immediately, not, quote, legal thresholds for detainment. By now, bystanders had formed a loose semicircle at a cautious distance. A young woman with wire-rimmed glasses made deliberate eye contact with Elise and mouthed, "I'm recording," while holding up her phone. 3 more phones appeared from the small crowd, then 5, then 8. A digital jury forming in real time. "I'll stand right here, thank you," Elise replied, planting her sensible heels firmly on the sidewalk. "Am I being detained, or am I free to go?" "You're being difficult, which makes me think you have something to hide," the third officer, Sergeant Miller, interjected. His tone carried the weight of 2 decades spent speaking to civilians as if they were suspects by default. "Empty your pockets. Place your bag on the ground." "I will not consent to a search without probable cause," Elise replied, her years on the bench almost audibly resonating through each precisely chosen word. "As you should know, refusal to consent to a search cannot legally be construed as reasonable suspicion." 20 minutes to court. Sergeant Miller's radio squawked again. He stepped aside, speaking quietly into his shoulder mic. Elise caught fragments, matching the description. Uncooperative. Possible warrant check. A businessman in a charcoal suit slowed his hurried pace. "Everything okay here, officers?" he asked, his concern directed at the police, not at Elise. The subtle bias in his question spoke volumes, the automatic assumption that the officers were the ones who might need assistance. "Move along, sir. Police business," Daniels snapped, not even turning to face the man. The dismissal was practiced, automatic. The businessman hesitated, glanced at Elise, then continued walking, his pace noticeably slower, his head turning back twice before he disappeared around the corner. The seed of doubt planted. "I have a court appointment in 20 minutes, Elise stated calmly. "I will be late if this continues." "Should have thought about that before you decided to be difficult," Officer Reyes replied with a shrug. "Your schedule isn't our problem." 15 minutes to court. Officer Reyes stepped uncomfortably close to Elise, the brim of his cap nearly touching her forehead. She could see a small scar above his right eyebrow, the individual pores on his nose. "Listen," he said, voice lowered to a threatening whisper. "We can do this one of 2 ways. Either you cooperate right now, or we're going to have to place you in handcuffs until we sort this out." The crowd had doubled. Smartphones captured every word, every microaggression, every power play unfolding on the public sidewalk. A delivery driver had pulled his truck to the curb, hazard lights flashing, phone held high above the crowd for a better angle. "This is going on Twitter," he announced loudly enough for the officers to hear. "What exactly am I suspected of, officer?" Elise asked, voice steady, mind calculating. 7 years on the bench had taught her to think 3 steps ahead, to anticipate arguments before they were made. "There was a shoplifting incident 3 blocks over. Suspect is a black female, professional attire, carrying a bag." Officer Daniels' description was so vague it could have applied to hundreds of women within a mile radius. 10 minutes to court. "So you've stopped me because I'm a black woman with a briefcase. Is that correct, Officer Daniels? Badge number 4721. Elise enunciated each number with judicial precision, committing it to memory with the same care she used when recording important case citations. The officer flinched at her memorization of his badge number, hand instinctively moving to cover it, a telling gesture that the cameras caught in high definition. "Don't make this about race," Sergeant Miller warned, stepping forward, one finger raised as if admonishing a child. "We're just doing our job." "And I'm trying to get to mine," Elise responded, glancing meaningfully toward the courthouse dome visible over the officer's shoulder. The hint went unnoticed or ignored. A store owner emerged from his shop, door chiming cheerfully behind him, completely at odds with the tension on the sidewalk. "These officers giving you trouble?" he asked, but his words were directed at the police, not Elise. The owner's security camera above the door pointed directly at the scene, its red recording light blinking steadily. Another perspective, another record, another witness. "Stay out of this, sir," Reyes warned, turning to face the new voice. "I'm just asking," the store owner replied, hands raised slightly in mock surrender. "This is happening right in front of my business." "Then go back inside your business," Officer Daniels shot back, the edge in his voice sharper now. The crowd murmured at the unnecessary aggression. Someone whispered, "Power trip." Another voice, "They're harassing her." 5 minutes to court. A black and white cruiser pulled to the curb, lights flashing but siren silent. A police supervisor emerged, Lieutenant Brooks, according to his nameplate, summoned by the growing crowd and multiple calls to dispatch. His stride was practiced confidence. His expression suggested this was an unwelcome complication to his morning. He adjusted his belt as he approached, thumbs hooked through his duty belt in a posture of casual authority. "What's the situation here?" he asked his officers, barely acknowledging Elise's presence. His gaze swept over her as if she were furniture, rather than the focal point of the confrontation. "Subject matching a description, refusing to identify," Daniels reported, standing straighter for his superior, shoulders squaring, chin lifting. The performance of competence. "I've refused nothing lawful," Elise corrected, her voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to being heard in silent courtrooms. "I've asked what specific crime I'm suspected of committing that would justify detention." The lieutenant assessed the scene. The gathering crowd, the phones recording, the composed woman standing her ground. His eyes lingered momentarily on her tailored suit, the quality of her briefcase, calculations visibly running behind his eyes. She didn't look like a shoplifter, but protocol was protocol, and backing down now would undermine his officer's authority. "Let's all take a breath here," he said, assuming the role of reasonable mediator. A performance for the cameras more than a genuine attempt at de-escalation. 3 minutes to court. A young mother with a stroller slowed, then stopped. A construction worker in a neon vest crossed the street specifically to observe. 2 office workers emerged from a nearby building, coffee cups in hand, immediately pulling out their phones when they registered the confrontation. The crowd had morphed from a few curious onlookers to a diverse assembly of citizens, witnesses to the power dynamic playing out on their ordinary sidewalk. "Ma'am, sometimes it's easier to just cooperate," Lieutenant Brooks said, his tone falsely reasonable, a practiced good cop routine. "Show ID, we confirm, you're not who we're looking for, and everyone goes on their way." "And normalize unconstitutional stops? I think not," Elise replied, each word precise as a gavel strike. "The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches and seizures, Lieutenant. Surely you're aware of this." The crowd's murmurs grew louder at her confident invocation of constitutional rights. Someone whispered, "She knows her stuff." Another, "Lawyer, maybe?" The lieutenant's eyes narrowed. "That's your right, but we can detain you while we investigate." His voice hardened, the veneer of reasonableness evaporating like morning dew. "That's also in the law." His tone made it clear this was no longer about a shoplifting suspect. This was about compliance, authority, power, the demonstration of who controlled this patch of public sidewalk. 1 minute to court. A teenager near the back of the crowd whispered to his friend, "This is messed up." His companion nodded, filming steadily. "Going straight to TikTok," he replied. Police accountability check. Elise finally reached for her phone in her jacket pocket. "I need to make a call." "Put the phone down," Daniels barked, hand moving to his weapon, body tensing like a coiled spring. The sudden aggression sent a visible ripple through the crowd, a collective intake of breath. "I'm calling the courthouse to inform them I'll be late," she said evenly, thumb hovering over the screen. "The courthouse?" The lieutenant's eyebrow raised slightly. The first faint ripple of uncertainty crossed his face, like a pebble disturbing still water. 0 minutes to court. Session delayed. "Hands where we can see them," Officer Reyes demanded as Elise continued reaching for her phone, his voice sharp enough to make nearby pedestrians flinch. The sudden escalation in volume created an immediate tension. The crowd instinctively leaned forward, sensing the critical moment. In one fluid motion, Officer Daniels grabbed her wrist, twisting it enough to cause pain without leaving marks, a practiced move. Elise's phone clattered to the sidewalk, screen cracking on impact, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden hush that fell over the scene. The crowd gasped in unison. More phones appeared, capturing the moment contact escalated to restraint. A woman's voice called out, "That's not right," a man shouted. "I saw that." The collective witness gaining courage in numbers, the documentation multiplying exponentially. "Take your hands off me immediately," Elise stated, voice cutting through the commotion with judicial clarity. She did not struggle against his grip. She had no intention of giving them any justification. Her stillness was more powerful than resistance, her calm more unsettling than anger. "Against the wall, now," Daniels ordered, attempting to turn her around, fingers digging into her jacket sleeve. Lieutenant Brooks, sensing the situation spiraling, stepped closer. "Let's all calm down." His eyes darted to the growing audience, clearly calculating the optics. The situation was deteriorating, the crowd growing more hostile by the second, the cameras capturing every miscalculation. "I am perfectly calm," Elise said, maintaining eye contact with the lieutenant. "It's your officers who are escalating a situation without legal basis." 5 minutes past court time. "You're obstructing an investigation," Sergeant Miller interjected, voice raised for the benefit of the onlookers. "That's a charge in itself." "Investigating what, exactly?" Elise countered. "A suspicious woman walking to work? Or is it the briefcase that aroused suspicion? Perhaps my court shoes." Her calm sarcasm clearly irritated the officers, but the crowd's low murmur of approval was unmistakable. Someone clapped briefly. A court security officer in uniform, walking toward the courthouse for his shift, recognized Elise from a distance. Confusion swept across his face as he quickened his pace, hand instinctively moving to his radio. He pushed through the outer edge of the crowd, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Step back, sir," Sergeant Miller warned as the court officer approached, misreading his uniform as that of a transit security guard. "But that's," the court officer began, recognizing the federal judge he saw daily. "Move along," Miller interrupted, stepping between them, hand raised like a traffic cop. The court officer retreated slightly but pulled out his phone, speaking urgently into it while maintaining visual contact with the situation. His fingers moved rapidly across the screen, typing a message, an alarm being raised through official channels. 10 minutes past court time. "Let her go!" A voice from the crowd, bolder now, righteous indignation overcoming the usual bystander hesitation. Others joined in. "She has rights. This is harassment." The digital jury was rendering its verdict in real time, the public square becoming a court of public opinion. A teenager on a bicycle skidded to a stop, immediately beginning a live stream. "Yo, they're harassing this lady for nothing," his commentary began, camera zooming in on the officers' badges, then panning to Elise's calm face. The viewer count ticked upward. 5, 12, 27, 54. "This is how they do us," the teen continued, his voice a mix of anger and resigned familiarity. "Professional black woman just walking to work, and look what happens. Share this stream, y'all. People need to see this." Officer Daniels still had hold of Elise's arm, his grip tight enough to wrinkle her suit jacket. "You're only making this worse for yourself," he muttered, low enough that the cameras wouldn't catch it. "I think you've got that backwards, officer," she replied, her voice level but carrying enough for the nearest phones to record. "Every second you continue this unlawful detention compounds your liability." Her legal terminology visibly rattled him. Civilians weren't supposed to talk like that. They weren't supposed to understand the boundaries of police authority. His grip loosened slightly, an unconscious admission of uncertainty. Last chance, identification or handcuffs. Lieutenant Brooks stated flatly, patience visibly eroding. The situation had attracted far more attention than he'd anticipated, but backing down now would be an admission of error. And cops didn't make errors, at least not publicly. The officers had formed a tight semicircle around Elise, cutting off her path to the courthouse, backs to the growing crowd. The positioning seemed choreographed, a formation they'd practiced. Containment, intimidation, control. 15 minutes past court time. Elise's phone rang from where it lay on the sidewalk, screen still intact enough to display courthouse as the caller. She made no move to answer it, maintaining eye contact with the lieutenant. "That would be my clerk," she said calmly. "Wondering why court is delayed this morning?" "Lady, nobody cares about your work problems." Daniel scoffed, voice raised enough for the recording devices to capture clearly. "ID, now." The live stream comment section erupted. "They don't even listen to her. She said she works at the courthouse. This is straight profiling." A woman in scrubs pushed to the front of the crowd. "I'm a witness to all of this," she announced, voice carrying with the practiced projection of someone used to being heard in emergency situations. "And I'll testify that these officers have no grounds for this detention." "Back up, ma'am," Sergeant Miller ordered, turning to face her. "I know my rights, too," the nurse replied, standing her ground. "I'm not interfering, I'm observing, and I'm telling you now, this will be reported." 20 minutes past court time. "Do you have any idea what you're interfering with?" Elise asked quietly, addressing Lieutenant Brooks directly. "Or who I am?" Something in her tone, the absolute certainty, the complete lack of fear, caused him to pause. His eyes narrowed, reassessing. "Enlighten me," he replied, sarcasm failing to mask his growing unease. "In due time, Lieutenant. In due time." Her smile was slight but significant, the expression of someone who knew something the others didn't. Maxwell had no doubt. A black SUV with government plates pulled to the curb half a block away. The officers didn't notice, attention fixed on their unwilling suspect. "Hands behind your back," Daniels ordered, unclipping his handcuffs, the metal catching sunlight as he raised them. The decisive moment had arrived. Escalate to arrest, or back down and lose face. The court security officer had returned with reinforcements, 2 U.S. Marshals from the courthouse advancing with purposeful strides, their expressions grim. "That's far enough," one marshal called out, approaching the scene, hand resting on his holstered weapon. "Federal agents, stay back," Sergeant Miller warned, turning toward the new threat, hand automatically moving to his service weapon. "U.S. Marshals service," the lead marshal clarified, displaying his badge with practiced efficiency. "There seems to be a misunderstanding." 25 minutes past court time. The live stream viewer count hit 312. Comments scrolled rapidly. "What's happening? Those cops need to back off. Who is she? They picked the wrong one today." "We're handling a situation here," Lieutenant Brooks responded, authority in his voice wavering slightly at the appearance of federal officers. "Yes," the marshal agreed, eyes flickering between the officers and Elise. "You certainly are." 30 minutes past court time. "Officers," the marshal addressed them formally, badge still displayed. "You are currently detaining the Honorable Judge, Elise K. Montgomery, of the United States District Court." The silence that followed was deafening, a vacuum of sound so complete that traffic noise seemed to momentarily cease. Officer Daniels' hand fell away from his cuffs, as if they'd suddenly turned red hot. Lieutenant Brooks' expression froze somewhere between disbelief and dawning horror, the blood visibly draining from his face. Judge Montgomery was due in court 30 minutes ago to hear preliminary motions in United States v. Metropolitan Police Department, the marshal continued, his voice carrying to the crowd of onlookers, now numbering at least 50 citizens. A case involving alleged unconstitutional stops by officers of your department. The crowd's reaction rippled outward like a shockwave. Gasps, murmurs, a few scattered laughs of disbelief at the cosmic irony unfolding before them. The live stream comment section exploded. OMG, they stopped a judge. This is too perfect. Busted. They're so fired. No way. Talk about karma. They literally stopped the judge who's ruling on them. Officer Reyes took an involuntary step backward, his boot heel scraping against the concrete, the only sound in the suspended moment. Your Honor, the marshal addressed Elise, his tone shifting to one of formal respect. The court is awaiting your arrival. Without a word, Elise opened her briefcase and removed her federal judiciary credentials, holding them up not for the officer's benefit but for the cameras still recording. The leather wallet unfolded to reveal the gold federal judiciary emblem alongside her photograph and credentials. The contrast was stark, her calm dignity against their crumbling authority. Badge number 4721, she said quietly to Officer Daniels, holding his gaze. I'll remember it, and so will the court record. 35 minutes past court time. The crowd murmured as realization spread like ripples in a pond. Some people covered their mouths in shock. Others nodded with grim satisfaction. The officers stood paralyzed, unable to retreat, unable to proceed, trapped in a moment of their own making. A woman's voice from the crowd. They just racially profiled a federal judge. A man called out, Hope y'all got good lawyers. Someone else, this is going viral right now. The teen live streamer's commentary reached a fever pitch. Y'all seeing this? They stopped the judge who's about to rule on their case. You can't make this up. This is better than any movie. The officer's radio crackled, a dispatcher's voice cutting through the moment. Unit 473, be advised, headquarters is receiving calls about your current situation. Captain requests immediate update. Lieutenant Brooks reached for his radio, then hesitated, clearly unsure how to describe the catastrophe unfolding around him in official terms. How exactly does one report detaining the federal judge presiding over your department's misconduct case? Am I free to go now, officers? Elise asked, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority. The question was a formality. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Lieutenant Brooks found his voice first, attempting to salvage what dignity remained. Of course, Your Honor. We apologize for the misunderstanding. Misunderstanding, Elise repeated, letting the word hang in the air like evidence presented to a jury. Is that what we're calling it, when officers detain a citizen without reasonable suspicion? When they threaten handcuffs for exercising constitutional rights? When they grab someone's arm for reaching for a phone? The lieutenant had no response, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly. The marshals moved to escort her, one retrieving her cracked phone from the sidewalk, handing it to her with a respectful nod. As they turned toward the courthouse, Elise paused. Lieutenant, I expect a full incident report on this interaction on my desk by end of day, including officer names, badge numbers, and an unedited recording from all body cameras. Yes, Your Honor, he managed, the formality of address sitting awkwardly in his mouth. 40 minutes past court time. The crowd parted for her, phones still recording, capturing this unexpected third act. What the officers couldn't know was that Judge Montgomery had spent 3 years on the Police Accountability Commission before her appointment to the federal bench, or that her husband, Dr. James Montgomery, had been wrongfully detained by officers from the same precinct 2 years prior while walking home from his hospital shift. A young black law student in the crowd recognized her. That's Judge Montgomery. She's hearing the class action against MPD today. The connection rippled through the onlookers. context suddenly bringing the situation into sharp focus. The coincidence was too perfect, too poetic in its timing. As she walked away, Officer Daniels stared at her retreating form, finally seeing what he'd failed to see minutes earlier. The careful composure, the precise language, the unwavering confidence. Not entitlement, but authority. Not defiance, but dignity. Behind her, the crowd's attention turned back to the officers, cell phones still recording, capturing their stunned expressions, their uncertain glances at each other, their gradual realization that this morning's routine stop would have consequences far beyond anything they could have imagined. As Elise walked away with her marshal escort, her phone buzzed with a text from her clerk, Marcus. Defense counsel for MPD requesting delay due to unforeseen circumstances. Should I inform them you were personally experiencing those circumstances? Elise allowed herself a small, controlled smile. No, tell them the court is ready to proceed immediately upon my arrival. 45 minutes past court time. What none of the officers realized was that their stop of Judge Montgomery wasn't just an embarrassing mistake. It was potentially case-ending evidence in the very trial she was about to hear. The plaintiffs in United States versus Metropolitan Police Department alleged exactly this pattern of behavior: stopping black citizens without reasonable suspicion, escalating nonviolent encounters, demanding identification without legal grounds, and now it had happened to the presiding judge. On camera, from multiple angles, with dozens of witnesses. More critically, none of them knew that Judge Montgomery had recently been appointed to the Federal Judicial Conduct Review Board, with oversight authority on cases involving police misconduct across 5 states. The incident report Lieutenant Brooks would file would automatically trigger a review by that same board. A review that would examine not just this incident, but the department's entire pattern of similar interactions. The SUV with government plates pulled alongside her, the window lowered to reveal the U.S. Attorney herself, Gabrielle Vasquez, concern evident on her face. Judge Montgomery, are you all right? We've been trying to reach you. I'm fine, Counselor, but I believe your case just gained a powerful new piece of evidence. The U.S. Attorney's eyes widened as Elise briefly described what had transpired. That's incredibly convenient timing, she said carefully. Not for the defense, Elise replied, her expression neutral but resolute. As they approached the courthouse steps, press photographers already gathering as word spread, Elise noticed a familiar face in the crowd. Congressman Davis, head of the House Judiciary Committee, in town for an unrelated matter. Their eyes met briefly. He nodded once, understanding passing between them without words. The doors of the courthouse opened before them. An institution of justice that would soon be forced to examine whether it truly lived up to its name. As she entered the courthouse, Elise nodded to her clerk, who handed her a folder. The defense filed an emergency motion to exclude new evidence, Marcus whispered, keeping pace beside her. New evidence? Elise asked, though she suspected the answer. 17 videos of your encounter just uploaded to social media. They've already been authenticated and submitted by the plaintiffs. The first one has over 20,000 views already. 17, Elise repeated softly. The world is always watching now. The courthouse hallway fell silent as she passed, staff and attorneys recognizing something had happened, though details remained unclear. By the time she reached her chambers, 3 news vans had parked outside the courthouse. The story was spreading like wildfire through legal channels, social media, and news outlets. Your robe, Your Honor, Marcus said, holding it open for her. As she slipped it on, the weight of the black fabric settled on her shoulders, a familiar burden, but one that carried new meaning today. The robe wasn't just a symbol of her authority now. It was a declaration that justice applied to everyone, even those who dispensed it selectively. Judge Montgomery entered her courtroom precisely 55 minutes late. The gallery packed beyond capacity. attorneys, journalists, police representatives, and community members who'd somehow heard about the morning's events. Whispers ceased immediately as she appeared. "I'll rise for the Honorable Judge Elise K. Montgomery," the bailiff announced. She took her seat at the bench, straightened her robes, and surveyed the room with perfect composure. Nothing in her demeanor betrayed that less than an hour ago, she'd been threatened with handcuffs on a public sidewalk. "The court apologizes for the delay," she stated for the record, her voice clear and measured. "I was unavoidably detained by officers of the Metropolitan Police Department while walking to court this morning." "I guess that's that, Ani." A ripple of murmurs swept through the gallery like wind through tall grass. The police department's lead counsel, Harrison Wells, visibly paled, his complexion suddenly matching his gray three-piece suit. He shuffled papers frantically, leaning to whisper urgently with the police commissioner. "Your Honor," Wells began, rising quickly, sweat beading at his temples. "The department has filed an emergency motion for your recusal given this morning's incident." Judge Montgomery reviewed the hastily filed motion before her, taking her time, letting the moment stretch uncomfortably. "Motion denied, Counselor. The incident in question serves as factual evidence potentially relevant to the case, not as grounds for recusal." She continued, "The judicial code requires recusal where a judge's impartiality might reasonably be questioned. This morning's events don't create bias. They provide first-hand observation of the very conduct at issue in this litigation." Wells remained standing. "Your Honor, with all due respect—" "You'll have your turn, Counselor," she interrupted, the subtle shift in her tone silencing him immediately. "First, I'd like to address the court's perspective on the evidence before us." The data was displayed on the courtroom screens, meticulously compiled statistics from the department's own records. According to the evidence, black pedestrians were 8.7 times more likely to be stopped than white pedestrians in the district. The department's own internal audit showed that 76% of stops resulted in no citation or arrest, with that percentage rising to 89% for black pedestrians. "This morning," she continued, "I became one of those statistics. Cameras weren't allowed in federal court, but sketch artists' pencils moved furiously, capturing the moment. The gallery was utterly silent. "Let me be absolutely clear," Judge Montgomery stated. "This court's ruling will be based solely on law and evidence, but the evidence now includes direct observation of departmental practices." The courtroom screen displayed charts from the plaintiff's filing, demographic data, stop outcomes, and officer disciplinary records from the past 5 years. The visual impact was undeniable, clear patterns emerging from the department's own numbers. The court notes that Officer Daniels, badge number 4721, has been named in 17 civilian complaints for improper stops with 0 disciplinary actions. Judge Montgomery stated, her perfect recall of the badge number landing like a precision strike in the silent courtroom. Sergeant Miller appears in 23 similar complaints. "They were in 12 where indefinite weather," the justice commented as Sergeant Miller The police commissioner, Raymond Reynolds, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, tugging at his collar, the weight of the federal court pressing down on decades of institutional protection. "Your Honor," Wells protested, rising again, "these individual officer records are not relevant to the systemic claims. On the contrary, Counselor, the pattern of individual officer behavior combined with the department's response, or lack thereof, is precisely what establishes a pattern or practice claim. Supreme Court precedent in Monell v. Department of Social Services makes this clear." The screen showed the department's budget, $157 million, 0 cents annually, with just $1,300,000, 0 cents allocated for accountability and training programs. The contrast in numbers was stark, damning in its proportionality. "Commissioner, Judge Montgomery addressed the uniformed man directly. Your department operates under a consent decree from 2019, requiring documented reasonable suspicion for all pedestrian stops. According to the court monitor's report, compliance has fallen from 82% to 37% in the past 18 months. Would you care to explain why? The commissioner hadn't expected to be addressed directly. He rose slowly, clearly uncomfortable. Your Honor, we've faced budget constraints and staffing shortages. Yet your tactical equipment budget increased by $12,400,000 during that same period, she noted. Priorities, Commissioner. They're reflected in your allocation choices. The commissioner had no good answer. He sat down heavily, the leather chair creaking beneath him. The plaintiff's expert witness, Dr. Hernandez, analyzed 12,847 pedestrian stops from January 2023 to present, Judge Montgomery continued. His findings indicate that in predominantly black neighborhoods, reasonable suspicion was documented in only 23% of stops, compared to 71% in predominantly white neighborhoods. She let the numbers hang in the air, their weight palpable. Each statistic a story. Each percentage, a person's life disrupted. The Fourth Amendment isn't a suggestion, Commissioner Reynolds. It's a constitutional requirement. Judge Montgomery reviewed the proposed settlement agreement submitted by the plaintiffs, taking her time, letting the silence in the courtroom build anticipation, tension, awareness. The court is prepared to approve the consent decree with the following modifications, she declared finally. First, independent monitoring with quarterly public reporting, accessible online to all citizens. Second, mandatory body camera activation for all citizen interactions, with failure resulting in immediate suspension. Third, a civilian review board with subpoena power. Wells jumped to his feet. Your Honor, these terms are unprecedented. AS is stopping a federal judge on her way to hear a case against your client, Counselor. She replied evenly. The department has two options. Accept these terms or proceed to trial, where I will allow the videos from this morning to be entered as evidence. The commissioner whispered urgently to Wells, their hushed conversation clearly heated despite attempts at discretion. Furthermore, Judge Montgomery continued, the court will require implementation of an early warning system, identifying officers with pattern behavior problems before they become liabilities. Officer Daniels would have been flagged by such a system after his third complaint, potentially preventing 14 subsequent incidents. Wells whispered something to the commissioner, who shook his head emphatically. A 10-minute recess for the defense to confer, Judge Montgomery announced, rising. But I remind the commissioner that my patience, like the public's, has limits. As she exited to her chambers, the courtroom erupted in hushed conversations. Through the door, she heard the commissioner's voice raised. We don't have a choice. In her chambers, her clerk handed her a tablet. The videos have gone national, Your Honor. CNN is covering it live. Elise nodded once, not surprised. Has the mayor called yet? 3 times, Marcus confirmed, and the governor's office twice. When court resumed 10 minutes later, the energy had shifted. The commissioner's shoulders had slumped in resignation. Wells's expression was one of damage control rather than defiance. When court resumed, Commissioner Reynolds approached the podium himself, leaving his attorney seated, a gesture acknowledging the gravity of the moment. Your Honor, the department will accept the terms of the modified consent decree, he stated formally, the words clearly difficult for him to voice. For the record, Judge Montgomery replied, the court requires more than verbal assurance. I want a signed agreement and a public commitment to the reforms outlined. The commissioner nodded stiffly. We understand, Your Honor. Additionally, she continued, the court will require Officer Daniels, Sergeant Miller, and Lieutenant Brooks to personally attend the signing ceremony and the first public meeting of the Civilian Review Board. That's not standard procedure, Wells objected, rising halfway from his seat. Neither is detaining citizens without cause, Counselor. Yet here we are, she responded, the subtle edge in her voice silencing further protest. Perhaps their presence will underscore the human cost of unconstitutional policies. The data projector displayed the settlement's financial terms: $42 million, 0 cents for victims of unconstitutional stops; $15 million, 0 cents for new training programs; $8 million, 0 cents for the civilian oversight implementation. The department will also implement a custom-designed mobile application that records all civilian encounters, automatically flagging those that deviate from constitutional standards, Judge Montgomery ordered. Monthly compliance reports will be filed with this court for the next 5 years. The commissioner agreed to all terms, his voice growing fainter with each concession. Final point, Judge Montgomery added. The court recognizes that systemic problems require systemic solutions. The officers involved in my detention this morning were operating within a culture that tacitly approved their behavior. While they must be held accountable, true reform must address the root causes. She paused, letting her words settle across the courtroom. This consent decree isn't punishment, it's correction. An opportunity to rebuild trust with the communities you're sworn to protect. The commissioner nodded once, something like relief crossing his face, perhaps at being seen as more than simply a villain in this unfolding drama. Within 48 hours of the settlement announcement, Internal Affairs launched investigations into the 3 officers involved in Judge Montgomery's detention. Their body camera footage, which showed the encounter from their perspective, was reviewed not just by department officials, but by the newly formed Oversight Committee. Officer Daniels received a 30-day suspension without pay and was permanently reassigned to desk duty. Sergeant Miller faced a demotion and mandatory retraining. Lieutenant Brooks received a formal reprimand that would prevent any future promotion. More significantly, all 3 officers were required to personally apologize to Judge Montgomery in a closed-door meeting that would be recorded and used in department-wide training sessions. The meeting took place 1 week after the incident. The officers entered her chambers, none making eye contact as they took their seats across from her desk. "Gentlemen," she began, "I didn't request this meeting to humiliate you. I wanted to speak directly without cameras or attorneys." Officer Daniels finally looked up, surprise evident in his expression. "I don't want your careers ended," she told them. "I want them transformed. You have an opportunity to become examples of what policing should be, rather than what it too often is." "With all due respect, Your Honor," Lieutenant Brooks began, "we were following established protocols for suspicious person reports." "That's precisely the problem, Lieutenant," she replied. "When established protocols violate constitutional rights, following them doesn't absolve responsibility. It compounds it." Officer Daniels shifted in his seat. "The description matched," he said quietly, a last attempt at justification. "Did it?" Judge Montgomery asked. "A black female in professional attire describes thousands of women in this city, including 3 of my colleagues on the federal bench, 2 city council women, and dozens of attorneys who enter this courthouse daily." Sergeant Miller stared at his hands. "We didn't know who you were." "That's the point, Sergeant," she replied. "You shouldn't need to know who someone is to respect their constitutional rights. The 4th Amendment doesn't protect only judges or lawyers or doctors. It protects everyone." A moment of silence fell over the room. "I want you to tell me honestly," Judge Montgomery said, leaning forward slightly. "If I had been a white woman in that same suit, with that same briefcase, would you have stopped me?" The question hung in the air, uncomfortable and unavoidable. None of the officers answered immediately. Finally, Officer Daniels spoke. "I'd like to think yes, but—" He trailed off, the unfinished sentence more honest than any rehearsed response. "That awareness," Judge Montgomery said quietly, "is the beginning of change." The officers' union initially protested the disciplinary actions, but backed down when faced with the overwhelming public support for Judge Montgomery after video of the incident went viral. The hashtag badge number 4721 had trended nationally for 3 days. "This isn't about punishment," she explained to the press after the consent decree was formally signed. "It's about accountability and growth. Law enforcement without constitutional compliance isn't law enforcement at all." Within 3 months, the Metropolitan Police Department had installed the new civilian encounter app on all officer smartphones, reducing improper stops by 63%. Established the Civilian Review Board with 7 community members and 4 retired law enforcement officials. To implemented new training program focused on constitutional policing and implicit bias recognition. Created a public dashboard showing stop data broken down by demographics, outcomes, and individual officer statistics. The most innovative aspect was the Montgomery Protocol, a set of clear guidelines for officer interactions with citizens that required verbal articulation of reasonable suspicion before any detention. Under the new protocol, officers were required to state, on body camera, the specific behaviors or circumstances that constituted reasonable suspicion before initiating a stop. "You match a description" was explicitly defined as insufficient grounds without additional specific details. The protocol also mandated that officers inform citizens of their right to terminate voluntary encounters, a key distinction that had been deliberately blurred in previous training. Body camera footage was now automatically uploaded to a secure server accessible to both Internal Affairs and the Civilian Review Board, with random weekly audits ensuring compliance. Officers who failed to activate cameras or properly articulate reasonable suspicion received progressive discipline, beginning with additional training and escalating to suspension or termination for repeated violations. "The goal isn't perfect policing," Judge Montgomery stated at the first public meeting of the Review Board. "The goal is accountable policing. When mistakes happen, and they will, there must be transparency, consequences, and learning." Community members who had experienced improper stops were invited to share their stories during training sessions, humanizing the statistics, putting faces to the numbers, creating empathy where policy alone had failed. The department's initial resistance gradually gave way to recognition that the reforms weren't hampering effective policing, they were enhancing it. Officers spent less time on fruitless stops and more time addressing actual criminal behavior. Complaint numbers dropped, while clearance rates for serious crimes increased. 6 months after implementation, a survey showed officer job satisfaction had actually increased. Without the pressure to generate high stop numbers, officers reported feeling more connected to community-oriented policing goals. "We're finding a better way forward," Commissioner Reynolds admitted in a televised interview. "It turns out constitutional policing isn't just legally required, it's more effective." 1 year after the incident, pedestrian stops had decreased by 42% citywide, while successful arrests from those stops increased by 38%. Evidence that officers were using better judgment rather than casting wide nets. Constitutional policing hadn't reduced effectiveness, it had enhanced it. Crime rates remained stable, contradicting dire predictions from police union representatives who had warned that handcuffing officers would unleash lawlessness. Officer Daniels, surprisingly, had become an advocate for the reforms. After his suspension, he'd requested assignment to community outreach and eventually was selected to help train other departments implementing similar measures. "I was wrong," he admitted in an interview that later went viral. "For years, I confused respect with fear, compliance with safety. The Montgomery Protocol hasn't made my job harder, it's made it clearer." His candor earned him unexpected respect from community members who had once viewed him as a symbol of everything wrong with policing. His transformation became a case study in how accountability could lead to growth, rather than resentment. "I look back at that video now," Daniels said, "and I don't recognize that officer. I was operating on autopilot, following procedures without questioning their impact. Now I understand that constitutional policing isn't an obstacle to doing my job. It's the very definition of my job." The Metropolitan Police Department, once notorious for its resistance to oversight, became a national model for constitutional policing. Delegations from departments across the country visited to study the Montgomery Protocol in action. The mobile app was licensed to 12 other major cities within 18 months. Judge Montgomery received the National Bar Association's Civil Rights Award and was mentioned as a potential future Supreme Court nominee, though she consistently deflected such speculation. "My goal isn't advancement," she said when asked about higher aspirations. "It's improvement of our systems, our institutions, and our understanding of justice." But her most significant legacy wasn't the settlement or the reforms. It was changing the conversation around policing from adversarial to collaborative. The Montgomery model demonstrated that meaningful accountability and effective law enforcement weren't competing interests. They were complementary requirements for a functioning democracy. A documentary about the transformation, titled Badge Number 4721, premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and was acquired by a major streaming service. It told the story not just of one confrontation, but of how a moment of injustice became a movement for systemic change. Sometimes, Judge Montgomery reflected in the documentary's final scene, it takes seeing something up close to truly understand its impact. That morning on the sidewalk, I experienced what thousands of citizens endure daily without the benefit of a federal judiciary ID. The difference is that I had the power to demand change. The moral imperative was to use that power not just for myself, but for everyone. Has someone in authority ever judged you by your appearance rather than your character or credentials? That moment when assumptions override evidence, when stereotypes eclipse individuality? This story isn't just about one judge's experience. It's about creating systems where everyone receives equal treatment under the law, regardless of race, gender, or appearance. It's about holding power accountable while creating pathways for meaningful change. If you've witnessed or experienced similar treatment, document it. Knowledge is power and evidence is change. Your smartphone isn't just a device. It's a tool for transparency in a world that too often operates in convenient shadows. The Montgomery Protocol didn't emerge from theory. It was born from lived experience, documented reality, and the courage to demand better. It demonstrated that even deeply entrenched systems can change when confronted with irrefutable evidence and practical solutions. The officers who stopped Judge Montgomery that morning couldn't see beyond their assumptions. They couldn't recognize the authority standing before them because it didn't match their expectations of what authority looked like. Their failure wasn't just procedural, it was perceptual. But perception can change, systems can improve, justice can become more than an aspiration, it can become a practice. That's why we at Beat Stories bring these narratives to light, real experiences that expose broken systems and celebrate those who transform them. Each story we share is another beat in the rhythm of change, another note in the melody of progress. Subscribe to Beat Stories for more accounts of everyday people creating extraordinary change through intelligence rather than violence, through systems rather than shouting, through persistence rather than privilege. Where mainstream media offers headlines, we deliver the human heartbeat behind them, the hump of a kratom, the struggle, and the sense that martyrdom. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that justice isn't just an abstract concept. It's something we build together. One interaction, one reform, one camera, one voice at a time. Because sometimes, the most powerful weapon against injustice isn't a gun or a badge. It's knowing exactly who you are and standing firmly in that truth. Even when especially when others try to make you small. Remember, badge number 4721. But, more importantly, remember Judge Elise Montgomery, who turned a moment of humiliation into a movement for transformation. And remember that Beat Stories will continue bringing you these powerful narratives of change, one beat at a time.